Okay, well, so we have been talking about these five, what we can call emanations or embodiments of different qualities, different states of awareness that go from the very first Buddha, and in this case, the Buddha in the center is the Buddha Vairochana, who, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, embodies this primordial uh, shunyata, state of shunyata, this sort of nature of all things as they exist in the universe. And quite luminous, quite brilliant. In fact, Vairochana is called the illuminator in some cases. And we talked about Akasha Datishvari, who is his consort. If you weren't able to attend the last couple of weeks, when we talk about wisdom energy, we're talking about a union between male and female principles. We're talking about basically the what we can call the passive energy of the consort, of the female energy, of the female principle that then um, gives the male part, which is these Buddhas, the male aspect, the energy to act, and the clarity and skillful means by which these Buddhas can act for all beings, and remembering that all of these, from the standpoint of the Vajrayana tradition or the Tantras in the Mahayana tradition, the aspiration here is always going to be loving kindness and compassion, or bodhicitta motivation. So as we continue to talk about these different Buddha families, under which uh, each of these Buddhas, there are these families, these other deities and dakinis and beings and wrathful beings who are there really to help us in accord with our nature. Um, we are also bearing in mind that this all happens out of our motivation, not simply to be awakened for our own selves, but for the benefit of others too. To show up to suffering with these skillful means. So here, what we're seeing here are the five Buddhas in what is probably taken from a tanka, and the tanka is one of those sort of tapestries with a mandala on it, and often it has these two red sort of pieces of thin fabric down, and usually a golden colored or saffron colored silk covering that goes over it. And so you may see them on the walls of monasteries, and nowadays there are quite a few in museums as well. I have a few here in my place. And so this is sort of a mandala, but it's really an image kind of the various Pure Lands and the five Buddhas. So here in the center, as I mentioned, we have this Dharma Dhatu, this primordial wisdom exemplified by Vairochana. And then as we move from here down to the blue figure here, we move from that to Akshobhya Buddha. And Akshobhya Buddha is that aspect of awareness. He is called the immovable one, in which the mind is seen to be purely reflective like a mirror. This arises out of Dharma Dhatu, and at least in the way that I learned this, which can sometimes vary depending on the tradition and the lineage. So Akshobhya is the pristine quality of awareness arising out of Dharma Dhatu that has a mirror-like wisdom. And so here, as we continue to cultivate uh, our our sense of realization, our experiences, we're just seeing all things as a reflection, just as they are, without adding into them. Here, the transformation is that of hatred and anger, that is then metabolized into pristine awareness. And then, as we move to the left side, the yellow figure on the left, or golden figure, we arrive at today's theme, which is the Buddha Ratnasambhava. Ratnasambhava. And so he is that quality of utter, undifferentiated seeing, or equality. So the quality of awareness that is largely called equanimity or equipoise arises out of this. That this, what Ratnasambhava represents, is sort of the sameness of all things, meaning that we aren't cultivating a sense of grasping that and rejecting that. Yeah, but this is an embodiment of awareness that has no preference but still remains highly engaged. It's seeing how all things are largely equal as they arise, and that includes our own thoughts and our own feelings. One thought arises, and it may be a difficult thought, a challenging thought, and the next thought that arises is maybe what we would call a pleasant thought. And what Ratnasambhava is there to represent is our own capacity for seeing the equality between these two forms of energy, these two forms of mental energy. So we'll talk more about him in a bit. And then briefly, as we continue up around in a clockwise motion, the very top, you see the red figure, and this is Amitabha Buddha. We will get to him next week. And Amitabha Buddha is the Buddha of infinite light. And then as we come around clockwise to the right side, the fifth Buddha here, the green fellow, is the Buddha Amoghasiddhi. And he is the one that is sometimes called all-accomplishing through skillful means, meaning that basically the wisdom of Green Tara, his consort, allows him to know how to act in the world, how to respond, and so forth. So we'll be getting more to that as well. So this is a fairly typical an image of a mandala. And often we will see the five Buddhas and their families sort of displayed here. Each of them represents a different direction, element, skanda, or aggregate. And largely the purpose of this is, as I mentioned, in the conventional way that we get to know, we're sort of moving towards ultimate understanding. This is seen to be a conventional tool by which one meditates, and one meditates sort of on the periphery, moving in towards the center. This particular mandala looks like this might be Avalokiteshvara in the middle, with 1,000 arms and such. But either way, this is pretty typical in terms of its construction. There are the four gates and then the center. The consorts, you can see, are sort of on the periphery as well. Now, I don't know, and I haven't prepared for all of the iconography. So if you have questions about, oh, what does this thing mean here and that image means there, I know some of it, but not all of it. So I would need to study up on some of that. It's been years, it's been almost 20 years since I've looked at kind of the really cool iconography of these things. But anyway, this shows you kind of an image of a mandala, and largely it is there to focus the mind, and not just to get sort of helplessly sucked into the image, but also but largely to reflect on the meaning of these different forms, these different Buddhas that we are looking at. And I think I may have mentioned a couple of weeks ago that these mandalas change, that the five Buddhas largely will shift who is in the center based on our nature and based on who and kind of what qualities it is that we are to be meditating on. So it's not always going to be Vairochana in the center. Sometimes it may be Amitabha, others it might be Ratnasambhava, and so on. And so we're going to also look here at some images of, oops, that's not, somehow these seem to be a bit out of order. Okay, here is the Buddha Vairochana. As I mentioned, sort of the primordial Buddha who represents the Dharma Dhatu, and the energy, if you will, the energy of emptiness, of luminosity as well. This is why, again, he's called the illuminator. And his consort is Akashadhatishvari, and otherwise known as How do we translate that? The womb of infinite space, I believe. Yes, the womb of infinite space. Some interpretations have her as white Tara. She looks very much like white Tara. And as I mentioned, I believe, the first week, largely this notion of spaciousness is largely due to her being a manifestation of the Dharmadhatu in its empty form. So she kind of represents the emptiness quality, and Vairochana more so the luminous aspect. And so in Dzogchen, we have this notion of unity between emptiness and luminosity. And here, emptiness, when we say emptiness, we're really talking about spaciousness. We're talking about openness without content. We're talking about just almost a sense of freedom of awareness without it being filled with projections and images and so on. And the element represented by both Vairochana and Akshobhya is the element of space. Okay, and then last time we did the second of the five Buddhas, the Buddha Akshobhya, who appears blue. His element and his consort Lochana are blue, and they represent the water element. And both Akshobhya and Lochana represent this reflective mirror-like quality of the mind. Pristine awareness. If you recall, the mirror itself is so clear, and the reflections that come and go in that mirror, we're able to kind of see them in context, see them for what they are, which are grosser forms of experience and mind. There is in the, I think it's the Lankavatara Sutra or the Anguttara Nikaya, where the Buddha says, luminous is this mind, brilliantly shining, but it is colored by the attachments that visit it. It is colored. It is not affected by them. It is not transformed by them. But these reflections simply appear in the same way that a clear lake reflects the trees, the mountains, the sky around it. The water itself is remaining pure. These reflections aren't inherent to the water. And so here is Lochana. I love this image. She has such a pleasant look on her face, and often these consorts and the Buddhas will be pictured in a position called Yabyum, which is where she is straddling him. It's a sexual posture to convey their unity. And I thought, for propriety's sake, I suppose, I don't know, I thought, let's not find necessarily all of those images, just in case someone is shocked by these, they haven't seen them before. But maybe that will be Five Wisdoms Part 2, 2.0. Either way, the point to that is really showing how wisdom energy, these two terms, are largely unified in embodied by their unity as well. So as I mentioned, the water element is part of them. No, I can't seem to. Oh, here we go. This is the third, then, of the five families. This is the Buddha Ratnasambhava. Ratna means jewel in Sanskrit. And he represents, and his consort, Mamaki, Mamaki, they represent the earth element. The earth element and equanimity, this quality of awareness that is, the word that comes to mind, is largely stabilized and ensconced in neutrality. But it's not a neutrality that is indifferent. It is an equanimity of presence of awareness without preference, but highly connected, highly engaged. Remember, the bodhisattva motivation, this aspiration to be of benefit in suffering within the world, is largely the motivational part of cultivating this kind of equanimity. So equanimity here is being infused with compassion. So we'll come back to him shortly, and you can see he has the jewels sort of in his crown, and as the being of Ratna, of jewels, he and also his consort are reflections of abundance. So abundance here basically being a complete sort of, not just abundance of material things, but an abundance of wisdom, an abundance of friendship, of community, an abundance of resources and opportunity, and so on. So often when you see yellow deities, such as in the case of the Hindu tradition, like Lakshmi, who probably would be, I'm not sure, but she might be sort of the counterpart to Mamaki, because Lakshmi appears as the nurturer, the goddess of wealth and abundance in Hindu traditions. So, and they're an interesting family. This is kind of an obscure image of Mamaki here. It was the best I could find. Interestingly, there aren't that many images of her anywhere online. There are a few, but they're just not quite, they don't quite reflect what I know her to look like. This was one of the closest images. And you can see she has this radiant jewel in her right hand that is conveying both sort of auspicious abundance, as well as there is energy in this jewel. There is transmission. There is the transmission of insight and wisdom by which Ratnasambhava is able to act and skillfully. And so here, what we might call Shakti in the Indian tradition, this transmission of divine female power and energy. Here it feels more sort of more active than it might be in the other Buddha families. Anyway, quite interesting, I think. And then as we continue, so like next week, we'll look more here at the Buddha Amitabha. He is usually pictured as red, with this clear, sort of reddish, almost pinkish, luminous quality of light. And he is the Buddha both of infinite light as well as the Buddha of longevity and well-being. And his consort is called Pandaravasini. It sounds like she's from Naples, doesn't it? Pandaravasini. Maybe she is, I don't know. De Napoli. Anyway, she too is red. I like this image. The colors in it. If you notice how her right foot is lower, she's not just in Padmasana, which is the lotus position as Amitabha is, but her foot is slightly down, and it's some people have compared Pandaravasini to red Tara. I'm not so sure that is true or not. I would have to go into some other sources that I trust more than Wikipedia and maybe some of the other ones. But anyway, she in her own right is a female Buddha, and also brings the wisdom of the luminous mind. Anyway, I don't want to give away the goods before we get there next week. And then the final one, the fifth, is the Buddha Amoghasiddhi. Buddha Amoghasiddhi, and he is the all-accomplishing one. He is the one who, having arisen out of these other kind of families from the Dharma Dhatu on, from Vairochana on, is the one who accomplishes through skillful means, through the wisdom of his consort, Green Tara. Green Tara, one of my favorite sort of beings. Om Tare Tutare Tura Zoha. She is sort of the embodiment, the wisdom of the motivational aspect of refuge and protection in the face of suffering. And it is out of this place that Amoghasiddhi sees the nature of suffering very clearly and knows how to respond. And it's a very practical skill here, or skillful means here. And then finally, this last slide is, we're back to this mandala. And there is a chant that is often chanted. Well, it's not that well known, but it is among certain circles and monastic types. This chant of Om Vajra Bhumi Ahum. Om Vajra Bhumi Ahum. It's a nice chant. Largely, it's a consecrating chant that consecrates a mandala. So if you're going to begin meditating on the mandala, there are various practices, and one of them is to chant this chant that it sort of imbues the mandala. It's almost an invocation of the energy possible between your mind and the mandala, unifying through this chant, Om Vajra Bhumi Ahum. And bhumi, the word bhumi means, it means ground or base. And so, and then the Vajra is that golden sort of thunderbolt. Ah is the syllable of emptiness. So Om Vajra Bhumi Ahum is largely sort of honoring the aspiration of this golden Vajra, the ground on which this golden Vajra allows us to cultivate. That's one way, anyway, to understand this. Om Vajra Bhumi Ahum. So when we are chanting this, we are sort of awakening that aspiration, that the quality of activating the energy, if you will, the luminous energy of the mandala. Each of these 5 Buddhas and their consorts are really there to help us transmute energy. And that there is kind of a skillfulness associated with each of them. So even if we're not focused on the Buddhas and the consorts and the imagery, we can just focus on the energies themselves. For example, Ratnasambhava and Mamaki, which is this third union between this male-female union, are seen to be responding to what we call the skandha of feeling. So I think someone mentioned this last week or the week before. I can't recall who it was during our discussion, but that the 5 aggregates are also part of each of these. And so the first for Vairochana and Akshobhya, his consort, is form. And the aggregate of form, in essence, that we see form, we perceive form, we are in nirmanakayas, or embodied, and this is that which arises from Dharmadhatu, from the Buddha field. Yeah? And so the Buddha field, the Dharmadhatu, is seen to be in the realm, associated with the form skandha. And interestingly, then the second one, Akshobhya, is associated now, and this is not in order, with consciousness, with the skandha of consciousness. And how this plays out then with Ratnasambhava, we are now in the form, or rather in the skandha of feeling, that largely our experiences are made up of this form, feeling, perception, mentation or conation, and consciousness. These are the sort of the 5 aspects of experience. And they each have sort of a clinging aspect to them. So, for example, the skandha of feeling. Feeling can be that which is craving, it can be resistance, so in the form of Akshobhya, as an example. Consciousness can be located sort of in its tendencies. I realize I'm starting to get into the weeds here. Let's just focus on feeling. Feeling can be either that which is subject to craving and aversion and so on, right? But it can also be when Ratnasambhava shows us how to be generous, feeling can also have this counter benefit that when we can experience generosity, selflessness, and the spirit of giving, that too is in the form of feeling, but it's a wholesome feeling. So when we explore these five Buddhas, we're also exploring sort of how they relate, how basically these teachings can help us transform things like prideful clinging and greed to generosity based on the teachings associated with each Buddha family. So it does get very sophisticated, and I don't pretend that this is just kind of an easy one-on-one kind of grid that you can look at. But I think that the merit here, when we talk about wisdom energy, we're really talking about the energy of feeling and transforming it through equanimity to generosity. That is what takes us from the greediness, cultivating equanimity, cultivating a sense of sameness, that this is very much like that, and then leading to basically the bodhicitta motivation of generosity and selflessness. The elements, so Vairochana is, and Akasha Datishvari, they represent space, the element of space. These are not in order of, earth, water, fire. Akshobhya is the water element, and again, water here being both that which unifies, it also has a reflective quality, and it also helps to transform. It actually helps to transform what's called the alaya vijnana, which is the sort of the storehouse consciousness, this very subtle quality of consciousness that stores karmic imprints, that is sort of preserved from one lifetime to the next. And so this quality is there to largely transform things like hatred and anger that may be stored within the alaya vijnana and transformed into pristine awareness. And how the water helps to do that is by cultivating a sense of flow, suppleness, as well as unity. Water is that which kind of unifies things too. And then when we move to today's theme, Ratnasambhava, he represents the earth element, as does Mamaki, his consort. And the earth element here being that of stability, rootedness, groundedness, and equanimity. So if you've ever done a mountain meditation, if you've ever done sort of that rooted, like an earth-centered meditation, what you're doing is cultivating the energy of Ratnasambhava and the wisdom of Mamaki. Again, she represents the wisdom piece, and the male represents the sort of the energetic sort of action dimension. Amitabha and his consort represent the fire element. And part of that is the luminosity, the heat, the purification, the well-being. If we cultivate a sense of tapas, or let's say we're doing what's called ujjayi breathing or tumo practice, which is a Vajrayana breathing meditation that ignites the inner fire, we're working with that quality, represented by Amitabha Buddha and his consort. And then finally, the fifth one is Amoghasiddhi, is air. So that's the fifth element, air. So I think if you consider Dharma Dhatu as the origin, the source, capital S, right, that brings things into being, and it's also that which we are seeking to recognize, to sort of realize that it's not just about me and myself, but it's largely about the entire cosmic consciousness as represented by Vairochana Buddha, right? And then we move into Akshobhya, the immovable one, the imperturbable one, and his consort Lochana, where mind is reflected like a mirror. There is a process here. And here, equanimity arising out of that reflectiveness, the realization that because my mind is like a mirror, the mirror part of it, not necessarily just the reflections, that the mirror is totally in equanimity. And then the reflections will come and go, as well as maybe what we might call projections onto the mirror. And then next time, the wisdom of Amitabha Buddha will be, okay, within that, there is discriminating awareness, but it is insight. So you see, there is a process at work here. And then finally, with Amoghasiddhi, the fifth Buddha, there is action. There is responsiveness, skillful action. And that wisdom comes from Green Tara and basically mobilizes Amoghasiddhi to do the right thing skillfully. Because Green Tara is the one whose foot is on the ground ready to ease suffering. But we haven't gotten there yet. But I don't know if this answers your question. Is it moving us toward the Buddha field? I think what it's doing is seeking to help us realize that there are these distinct variations of awareness, qualities of awareness that are very subtle, that are distinct from each other. And we may experience, ultimately, when we experience shunyata, or complete openness of awareness, or single taste awareness, they're all one thing. But because we're working in the relative here, as I said at the beginning, the only one that is ultimate reality is Dharma Dhatu. All the others are like now working in conventional ways with very nuanced differences between qualities of awareness to transform certain afflictions into realization. Yeah, the other thing I'll say to your point, Michael, is that maybe this confuses things even more. But when we sort of realize this notion of unity, of shunyata, of one taste, we also see how this entire system is utter nonsense. That it is fundamentally ineffable. It can't be talked about in real terms, because it's still working here in the realm of relative. And at some point, we let go completely of all of these forms and explanations and the raft itself, simply to abide in awakening, if you will.